In a desperate race against time, a young girl discovers that her voice may be the only thing that can save her mother's life. But when she steps onto the stage, something happens that no one expected. This is a story of love, hope, and the extraordinary power we all hold within. Will Nina's voice be enough to change their fate? The rain drummed heavily on the windows of a small, dimly lit apartment on the outskirts of Seattle, Washington. Inside, Nina, a 14-year-old girl with quiet determination, sat at her mother's bedside, watching her struggle to breathe. Her mother, Celeste, had grown weaker with each passing day. Every breath seemed like a battle, and the doctors had been clear. Without a life-saving surgery, Celeste wouldn't survive much longer. The cost, however, was far beyond anything they could afford. Nina had always known that life wasn't easy, but the weight of this reality felt unbearable. Since her father left them when she was a toddler, it had been her and Celeste against the world. Her mother had worked tirelessly to provide for them, even sacrificing her own dreams. But now, as Celeste lay in bed, pale and weak, Nina felt helpless. "We'll find a way, Nina," Celeste whispered, though her voice trembled with the same uncertainty that weighed on Nina's heart. Nina nodded, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. "I promise, Mom," she said softly. But inside, she was breaking. How could they ever raise enough money for the surgery in time? The medical bills had already drained what little savings they had. The days passed slowly, filled with long silences and the constant ticking of the clock. One afternoon, as Nina sorted through a box of old belongings, searching for anything they could sell, she found something that made her pause. Tucked away in the bottom of the box was an old photograph of her mother, smiling brightly on stage, holding a microphone. Nina had known that her mother used to sing, but she had never truly understood how much music had meant to her. Suddenly, it hit her. Music. It had always been part of their lives. Celeste had taught Nina to sing when she was little, and Nina had always loved singing, though she had never performed outside the safety of their home. Her mother had given up singing to raise her, but maybe, just maybe, Nina could use that same talent to save her mother now. Her mind raced with possibilities. There had to be a way to use her voice, her one true gift, to raise the money they so desperately needed. That evening, after much hesitation, Nina found herself standing outside a small, unassuming restaurant called the Blue Note Cafe. The faded neon sign flickered above the door, and through the windows, she could see the warm glow of lights and hear the murmur of voices. The cafe was known for its live music nights, and she had heard from a classmate that anyone could sign up for a slot on stage. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood frozen in front of the door. What if she wasn't good enough? What if no one cared? But then she thought of her mother, lying in bed, struggling to breathe, and the fear melted away. This wasn't about her. It was about Celeste. Taking a deep breath, Nina pushed open the door and stepped inside. The cafe was cozy, filled with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of soft conversations. At the back of the room was a small stage lit by a single spotlight, where a young man was playing a guitar. Behind the bar stood Dylan, the cafe's owner, who was watching the performance with a practiced eye. Nina hesitated for a moment before walking up to the bar. "What can I do for you, kid?" Dylan asked, raising an eyebrow as he looked her over. I want to sing," Nina said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dylan stared at her for a moment, clearly not expecting such a request from someone so young. "You want to sing here, on stage?" he asked, incredulous. "This isn't a place for kids' talent shows." "I know," Nina replied, swallowing her nerves, "but I need to raise money for my mom's surgery. Please, just give me a chance." Dylan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck as he considered her request. "One song," he said finally. "If you're not as good as you think, that'll be the end of it." Nina nodded quickly, relief washing over her. This was her shot. As she made her way to the stage, her heart raced. The small crowd paid her no attention as she stepped up to the microphone. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath, and then let the music rise within her. Nina's voice was soft at first, trembling with nerves, but as she continued, it grew stronger, more confident. It was as though something inside her was awakening, something she hadn't even realized was there. She poured every ounce of emotion she had into the song, her fear, her love for her mother, her desperation, and it resonated in the air, filling every corner of the small cafe. Slowly, the conversations in the room faded. People began to look up from their tables, surprised by the unexpected power in the young girl's voice. Even Dylan, who had seen countless performers take the stage at the Blue Note Cafe, found himself staring, caught off guard by the depth and emotion in her singing. By the time Nina reached the final note, the entire room had fallen into a hushed silence. For a moment, there was no sound at all, just the lingering echo of her voice. Then, as if on cue, the crowd erupted into applause. People stood, clapping and cheering, moved by the raw emotion in her performance. Nina, overwhelmed, stepped back from the microphone, her heart racing. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected anyone to care. But they had listened, really listened. Dylan walked up to her as the applause continued, a look of surprise on his face. "I didn't see that coming," he said, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You've got something special, kid." Nina smiled, though her mind was still spinning. "Thank you," she whispered. But the applause and the praise weren't what mattered to her. She needed to raise money for her mother, and this was only the beginning. "I need to keep singing," Nina said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "Please let me sing here again." Dylan nodded slowly, still clearly impressed. "All right," he said. "You can sing here as long as you want, but you better keep that fire in you." Over the next few weeks, Nina sang at the Blue Note Cafe almost every night. Word quickly spread about the young girl with the extraordinary voice, and soon the small cafe was packed with people eager to hear her perform. Night after night, Nina stepped onto the stage and gave everything she had, her voice carrying the weight of her love for her mother and her desperation to save her. The tips she earned after each performance were a lifeline, slowly adding up, but it still wasn't enough. No matter how much she sang, no matter how full the cafe became, the money trickled in too slowly. Every night, after her performances, Nina would return home and sit beside her mother's bed, counting the money and wondering if it would ever be enough. Her mother's condition worsened and time was running out. Then, one evening, as Nina finished another set, a woman approached her. She was well-dressed, with an air of authority, and she introduced herself as Rebecca Harris, a talent scout for a local production company. "You have an incredible gift," Rebecca said, looking at Nina with admiration. "I've been hearing about you for weeks, and now I understand why. I want to help you." Nina blinked, unsure of what to say. "I'm just trying to raise money for my mom," she said softly. "I know," Rebecca replied, her expression serious. "And I think I can help you do that. I want to organize a benefit concert for you. A real one, at a venue that can bring in enough money to cover your mother's surgery and more." Nina stared at her in disbelief. "A concert? A real concert?" "Think about it," Rebecca said, handing her a business card. "This could be the opportunity you need." The following days were a whirlwind as Rebecca worked to organize the concert. Posters went up around the city and word spread quickly through social media. People were excited to see the young girl whose voice had captivated everyone at the Blue Note Cafe, and tickets sold out within days. On the night of the concert, Nina stood backstage, her heart pounding in her chest. The venue was larger than anything she had ever imagined performing in, and the sheer size of the crowd filled her with a mix of excitement and terror. The lights dimmed, and the sound of applause echoed from beyond the curtain. This was it. This was her chance to save her mother. Taking a deep breath, Nina stepped onto the stage. The spotlight blinded her for a moment, but as she adjusted to the lights, she could see the sea of faces staring back at her, waiting in anticipation. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, but she forced herself to focus. This wasn't just about the concert, it was about everything she had fought for. The first notes of the song filled the air, and Nina let the music guide her. She closed her eyes, letting the familiar warmth of the melody wrap around her, and as she began to sing, the fear melted away. Her voice soared through the theater, filling every corner of the room with its power. The crowd was mesmerized. Every note, every word, carried the emotion that had driven her to this moment. The love she had for her mother, the fear of losing her, and the hope that, somehow, they could make it through. By the time Nina reached the final note, the audience was completely still, as if the entire world had paused to listen to her. Then, in an instant, the theater erupted into applause, louder and more thunderous than anything Nina had ever heard before. People stood from their seats, clapping and cheering, tears streaming down some of their faces. Backstage, Rebecca rushed to her side, her face beaming with pride. "You did it, Nina," she said. "That was amazing." But Nina only had one question on her mind. "Did we raise enough money?" Rebecca nodded. "More than enough." Nina collapsed into a chair, tears of relief filling her eyes. It was over. Her mother would get the surgery she needed. The surgery was scheduled for the following week, and Nina spent every moment by her mother's side. Celeste, though weak, smiled at her daughter with pride. "I always knew you were special," she whispered. "You've done more than I could have ever asked for." Nina smiled, though her heart was still heavy with worry. The surgery was dangerous, and despite the money they had raised, there was no guarantee that her mother would survive. The days leading up to the operation were filled with anxiety, each hour feeling like an eternity. Finally, the day of the surgery arrived. Nina sat in the waiting room, her hands trembling in her lap as the minutes crawled by. She prayed silently, hoping that all the love and effort she had put into her music would somehow be enough to save her mother. After what felt like a lifetime, the surgeon emerged from the operating room, his expression calm but serious. "The surgery went well," he said. "Your mother is going to be okay." Relief flooded through Nina as she collapsed into the nearest chair, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. Her mother was going to survive. The nightmare that had haunted them for so long was finally over. The days of fear and uncertainty were replaced with cautious optimism as Celeste began her slow recovery. For weeks after the surgery, Nina remained by her mother's side, helping her through the tough days of rehabilitation. Though still weak, Celeste's smile returned, and with it came the light and warmth that Nina had feared she would lose forever. "You've saved me, Nina," Celeste said one afternoon, her voice soft but steady. "And not just with the money. It was your singing. It gave me strength. I felt it, even when I couldn't respond. Your voice kept me fighting." Nina smiled, though her heart was full. She had sung for her mother, pouring everything into each performance. But now she realized something even more powerful. Her music had not only saved her mother, but it had saved her too. Through her songs, she had discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed, a strength that had carried her through the darkest of times. With her mother on the road to recovery, Nina continued to sing at the Blue Note Cafe, but things had changed. She wasn't singing for survival anymore. Now, it was about joy, love, and sharing her gift with others. People from all over the city came to hear her perform, and every night the small cafe was packed. Dylan, the cafe's owner, had watched Nina's transformation with quiet admiration. "You've come a long way, kid," he said one evening after another successful performance. "I knew you had something special, but I never imagined it would be like this." Nina smiled, feeling a new sense of confidence. "Thank you for giving me a chance," she replied. "I didn't know what I was capable of until I stepped onto that stage." Dylan shrugged, but there was a glint of pride in his eyes. "You've earned every bit of it." As the months went by, Nina's reputation continued to grow. She was invited to perform at local events, charity functions, and even some larger venues in the city. Her voice had become a symbol of hope and resilience, and people were drawn to her not just because of her talent, but because of the story behind it. Rebecca, the talent scout who had helped organize the benefit concert, remained by Nina's side, offering guidance and opportunities. "You've got a bright future ahead of you, Nina," she said one day after a particularly successful performance. "You're not just a singer anymore, you're an inspiration." Nina smiled, though the idea still felt surreal. She had never set out to become famous or to inspire others. All she had wanted was to save her mother. But now she realized that her journey had touched the lives of so many people, and that gave her a new sense of purpose. One evening, after another packed performance at the Blue Note Cafe, a man approached Nina. He was older, with graying hair and a quiet, serious demeanor. He introduced himself as Lucas Caldwell, a producer from Los Angeles who had been in the audience that night. "You have an extraordinary talent, Nina," Lucas said, his eyes sincere, "and I think the world deserves to hear it." Nina blinked, taken aback. I'm just a girl from Seattle," she said, her voice hesitant. "I'm not sure I'm ready for something bigger." Lucas smiled gently. "No one's ever ready for something bigger," he replied. "But that's what makes it exciting. I want to offer you a contract. I think you have the potential to do something truly remarkable." Nina felt her heart skip a beat. "A contract?" The idea of leaving her small, familiar world behind was both thrilling and terrifying. She had never imagined this, never imagined that her voice would take her beyond the confines of Seattle. "I'll need some time to think about it," Nina said, trying to steady her breath. "Of course," Lucas said with a nod. "But I hope you'll consider it. You have something special, Nina. Don't be afraid to share it with the world." That night, Nina sat at her mother's bedside, her mind racing with possibilities. The idea of signing a contract and pursuing a professional singing career seemed like a dream, but it was also a step into the unknown. Would she be able to handle the pressure? Would she lose the connection she had always felt to her music if it became a job rather than an expression of love? Celeste, sensing her daughter's turmoil, reached out and took her hand. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Nina hesitated for a moment before explaining the offer Lucas had made. She expected her mother to be excited, but instead, Celeste's expression remained thoughtful. "Do you want this, Nina?" Celeste asked after a moment of silence. "Not because it's what people expect, but because it's what you want?" Nina bit her lip, considering the question carefully. "I love singing," she said softly, "but I never thought it would take me this far. I don't know if I'm ready." Celeste smiled. "You're stronger than you think, Nina. You've already faced more than most people could imagine, and you did it with grace. If this is something you truly want, I know you can do it. But you don't have to rush into anything. Your music is yours. It will always be there, no matter what you choose." Nina nodded, her mother's words bringing her a sense of clarity. She didn't have to make a decision right away. She could take her time, continue to sing at the Blue Note Cafe, and figure out what path felt right for her. In the weeks that followed, Nina continued to perform at the Blue Note Cafe, each performance strengthening her connection to the music and the people who came to hear her. The weight of expectation no longer hung over her. She was singing because she loved it, and that was enough. Lucas Caldwell's offer remained on the table, but Nina didn't feel pressured to decide right away. She knew that her journey wasn't about chasing fame or success. It was about staying true to herself and the love she had always felt for music. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, Rebecca approached Nina with a smile. "You're incredible, Nina," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "But what I admire most is how grounded you are. You're not in this for the fame. You're in it because it's who you are. And that's rare." Nina smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I've learned that the most important thing is to stay connected to why I started singing in the first place," she said. "As long as I remember that, everything else will fall into place." And with that, Nina stepped off the stage, ready for whatever came next, not because she was chasing a dream, but because she was living it. As the months passed, Nina's name continued to grow. Her performances at the Blue Note Cafe were now legendary, and the crowds became larger with each passing night. People from across the city came not only to hear her sing, but to experience the emotional connection she created with her audience. Every note she sang was filled with the love she had for her mother and the challenges they had overcome. But with her growing reputation came new pressures. Rebecca and Lucas continued to offer opportunities that would take her beyond Seattle: record deals, tours, and television appearances. Nina knew these offers could launch her career in ways she had never imagined, but she also felt a deep connection to the simple life she had built at the Blue Note. Here she was free to express herself without the weight of expectations or the fear of losing her authenticity. One evening, after a particularly emotional performance, Rebecca approached her backstage. "Nina, you're incredible," she said, her voice full of excitement. "We've received another offer. It's a big one. An invitation to perform at one of the largest music festivals in Los Angeles. This could be your moment." Nina smiled, but inside she felt conflicted. The idea of performing in front of such a huge crowd both thrilled and terrified her. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she said quietly. Rebecca frowned slightly. "You've been saying that for months, Nina. But the world is ready for you. Don't let fear hold you back." Nina nodded, knowing that Rebecca was right. But still, the decision wasn't easy. She had seen how the pressures of fame could change people, and she didn't want to lose the connection she had to her music. That night, Nina returned home and found her mother sitting on the couch, reading. Celeste had grown stronger since the surgery, and every day Nina was reminded of the miracle they had fought so hard for. "Mom," Nina began, sitting down beside her, I've been offered another big opportunity, a festival in Los Angeles. It could be a huge break for me." Celeste looked up from her book, her eyes filled with warmth. "That's amazing, Nina. I'm so proud of you." Nina smiled, but her heart was still heavy with uncertainty. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like this. It feels like everything is happening so fast. I don't want to lose myself in all of it." Celeste set the book aside and took her daughter's hand. "You've always known who you are, Nina. That's one of the things I admire most about you. But sometimes we have to step out of our comfort zones to grow. Just because you take this opportunity doesn't mean you'll lose yourself. You're stronger than that." Nina nodded, feeling a bit of the weight lift off her shoulders. Her mother was right. She had already faced so much and had come out stronger. Maybe it was time to take the next step. The next morning, Nina met with Rebecca and Lucas to discuss the offer. "I've decided to accept the invitation to perform at the festival," Nina said, her voice steady. "But I need to do it on my terms. I want to make sure that no matter what happens, I stay true to myself and my music." Lucas smiled, clearly pleased with her decision. "That's exactly what we want, Nina. You've got something special and the world is going to love you for it." With that, the preparations for the festival began. Nina spent weeks rehearsing, perfecting her set, and preparing for what would be the biggest performance of her life. The anticipation was overwhelming, but with each passing day, Nina grew more confident. She knew she was ready. The day of the festival arrived, and as Nina stepped onto the massive stage, she was greeted by a crowd that stretched as far as she could see. Thousands of people had gathered to hear her sing, and for a moment Nina felt a wave of nerves wash over her. But then she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and reminded herself why she was there. This wasn't about fame or success. It was about the music, about the love she had for her mother, the struggles they had overcome, and the strength she had found in her voice. The first notes of the song began, and as Nina opened her mouth to sing, the fear melted away. Her voice soared through the air, carrying with it all the emotion and power that had brought her to this moment. The crowd was captivated, hanging on every word, every note. Nina felt the connection she had always felt at the Blue Note Cafe, but on a much larger scale. By the time she finished her set, the crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the air. Nina smiled, her heart full. She had done it, on her terms, staying true to herself and her music. After the festival, offers poured in from record labels, producers, and media outlets. Nina had become a sensation, but she remained grounded, always remembering the journey that had brought her to this point. She continued to perform, both in larger venues and at the Blue Note Cafe, where it had all begun. No matter how big her career became, Nina never forgot the people who had supported her from the start, the community that had believed in her when no one else did. As her career flourished, Nina used her platform to advocate for causes close to her heart, including healthcare reform and support for families in need. She knew firsthand how difficult it could be to navigate the system, and she wanted to make sure no one else had to go through what she and her mother had. Years later, Nina returned to the Blue Note Cafe for a special performance. The small venue was packed with people who had followed her journey from the beginning, and the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. As she stepped onto the familiar stage, Nina looked out at the crowd and smiled. Her mother sat in the front row, beaming with pride, and Dylan stood behind the bar, his usual stoic expression softened with pride. Nina took the microphone and began to sing, her voice as strong and soulful as ever. But this time there was no fear, no desperation, only joy. She had come full circle, and as the final note rang out, she knew that her journey was far from over. The applause that followed was deafening, but all Nina could hear was the sound of her own heart, beating with the knowledge that she had stayed true to herself. She had found her voice, not just in the music, but in the life she had built around it. And with that, Nina stepped off the stage, ready for whatever the future had in store. Nina's story became one of resilience, hope, and staying true to oneself. Her journey from a young girl singing to save her mother to a celebrated artist with a global platform was marked by authenticity, love, and a deep connection to her roots. She had used her voice not just to rise above adversity, but to inspire others to do the same. Through it all, Nina never lost sight of what mattered most: her music, her family, and the strength that had carried her through the darkest times. And as she continued to sing, she knew that her story was just beginning. Nina's rise to fame had not come without its challenges, but through each hardship, she had grown not only as a performer, but also as a person. She had learned the importance of perseverance, the power of community, and the strength of vulnerability. These lessons, hard-earned as they were, became the foundation on which she built her career. Rebecca and Lucas continued to offer her guidance, but they never pressured her to take on more than she was comfortable with. They respected her boundaries, understanding that for Nina, her connection to her music was more important than any commercial success. It was this authenticity that set her apart from so many others in the industry. Despite the growing fame, Nina always made time to give back. She volunteered at local community centers, teaching young children to sing, just as her mother had once taught her. She knew that her success was not just her own. It was the result of the support and love she had received from her mother, her friends, and her community. And now, she wanted to be that source of support for others. Her performances became legendary not just because of her vocal talent, but because of the raw emotion she poured into every note. Fans who attended her concerts would often describe the experience as cathartic, as though they had been on a journey with her through her struggles and triumphs. Nina had a gift for making people feel seen, understood, and connected to something larger than themselves. Her mother's recovery had been slow but steady, and as Celeste regained her strength, she began to live again, not just exist. She would often sit in the audience at Nina's shows, her eyes shining with pride, knowing that her daughter's voice had saved her life. But Celeste also knew that it had done more than that. It had given Nina a purpose, a calling that would carry her through whatever life threw her way. Nina's performances at larger venues began to draw crowds from all over the world, but she never forgot her roots. Every year she would return to the Blue Note Cafe for a special, intimate performance, just as she had when she was starting out. These shows were always sold out, with fans eager to experience the magic of seeing Nina in the place where it had all begun. Her relationship with Dylan had deepened over the years, and he had become a father figure of sorts. Though he never showed much emotion, there was always a gleam of pride in his eyes whenever he saw Nina perform. He would often tell her in his gruff voice, "You've done good, kid." And that was all she needed to hear. As her career continued to flourish, Nina began to receive more recognition for her philanthropic work. She started her own foundation dedicated to providing healthcare and music education for underprivileged families. The foundation was named after her mother, the Celeste Foundation, and its mission was simple: to give others the same hope and support that had saved their lives. Despite all the success and accolades, Nina remained grounded. Her mother had always taught her the importance of humility and gratitude, and those values stayed with her through everything. She knew that fame was fleeting, but the impact she made on others, that was what truly mattered. Her music continued to evolve, reflecting the different stages of her life. Each album she released told a new story, and with every song she invited her listeners to walk alongside her. Nina's voice, once a quiet whisper in a small cafe, had become a beacon of hope for millions. Nina's journey was far from over, but as she looked back on everything she had achieved, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had stayed true to herself, and that was her greatest accomplishment. Her voice had carried her through the darkest times, and it had become a source of light for so many others. As she prepared for another world tour, Nina took a moment to reflect on the path that had brought her here. From the small apartment in Seattle to the grand stages of the world, her story was one of perseverance, love, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and daughter. Her legacy would not be defined by the awards she won or the records she sold, but by the lives she touched along the way. And as long as she had her voice, Nina knew that her journey would continue, carrying her forward into whatever came next. With a final glance at the photo of her and her mother on that old stage, the one that had started it all, Nina smiled. She was ready for whatever the future held, knowing that she had already achieved what truly mattered. She had saved her mother, and in doing so, she had found herself. As the years went by, Nina's music continued to evolve, but the core of her artistry remained the same: raw emotion, vulnerability, and authenticity. She became known not just for her voice, but for her ability to convey deep, universal feelings through her songs. Each performance was a journey, a shared experience between Nina and her audience. Her mother's recovery was a constant source of joy and gratitude. Celeste, though never fully returning to her old self, was happy and healthy enough to live a full life, and she attended as many of Nina's concerts as possible. The bond between them only grew stronger, as they both knew how much had been risked, and ultimately saved, by Nina's decision to sing all those years ago. Nina's foundation, the Celeste Foundation, expanded its reach, helping thousands of families access medical care and musical education. It became one of the most respected charitable organizations in the country, with Nina personally involved in many of its initiatives. Despite her fame, she remained approachable, always willing to lend her time to those in need. Her career, too, had reached new heights, with world tours, critically acclaimed albums, and a devoted global fan base. But for Nina, none of that compared to the simple joy of seeing her mother smile from the audience, knowing that every note she sang was filled with the love and strength that had saved them both. She never forgot her humble beginnings at the Blue Note Cafe. Even as she graced the stages of the world's biggest venues, she always made time to return to the cafe, performing intimate shows for the people who had been there from the start. Each of these performances was a reminder of where she had come from and what she had fought for. One night, after a particularly moving performance at the Blue Note, Dylan approached her backstage, the familiar gruffness in his voice softened by pride. "You've come a long way, kid," he said, giving her a rare smile. "I always knew you had something special, but even I didn't see this coming." Nina smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you for believing in me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I wouldn't be here without you." Dylan waved her off, but there was a glint of moisture in his eyes. "Nah, kid, it was always in you. You just needed a push." As Nina left the cafe that night, she paused to look back at the flickering neon sign. The cafe had changed over the years, but its spirit remained the same. It was where her journey had truly begun, and in many ways, it would always feel like home. Her story was far from over, but Nina knew that no matter where life took her, she would never lose sight of the things that mattered most: family, music, and the power of love. Her voice had saved her mother, but it had also saved her. It had given her a purpose, a way to connect with the world, and for that, she would always be grateful. And as she walked down the familiar streets of Seattle, her heart light and her spirit full, Nina smiled. She had found her voice, and with it, she had found herself. Nina's story teaches us that the power of love and determination can take us to places we never imagined. Even in the face of the greatest challenges, when we believe in ourselves and stay connected to what truly matters, we can overcome anything. Nina's music not only saved her mother's life, but also touched the lives of many others, showing that our talents, when used with purpose, can make a difference in the world. What talent or passion do you believe could transform your life or the life of someone close to you? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming and inspiring stories. Stay tuned for more videos filled with motivation and incredible life journeys.